So just a flashback to session 1 for those of you who weren't able to make it, or for those of you who did make it and it's been a week. Some of the takeaways that I got in the survey that you guys filled out was that teaching kids how to be okay with trying to explain and revising thoughts as they learn is a big part of communicating in scientific ways and fostering productive science discussion. Giving the students an opportunity to work with the science with lower stakes, those low stakes phenomena before we get into the science ideas, to help them develop their scientific language. We can still use CSW in the NTI world, and we talked about some of the ways that we can do that. New tools to use for NTI like Pear Deck or Nearpod, Jamboard or Padlet, Zoom or Google Meets, and we're going to talk about a couple other ones today as well. How to model CSW and provide students with some sentence starters that are helpful, and practice, practice, practice always, especially once we're into the NTI world. And so we're not going to be using Pear Deck today. I wanted to look at some alternative ways to have some interactive meetings, and so we're going to be looking at some alternatives to that, but I just wanted to let you guys know that the information for Pear Deck is also in the slides for this, if you're interested in using Pear Deck. All right, so some feedback that I got on those surveys from last time. At first, it was kind of difficult going back and forth between Pear Deck, the Google Docs, and Zoom, but it flowed nicely after about a half an hour. So I want to forewarn you that we are going to be going back and forth between a couple things today. So again, having 2 browsers open might be helpful, kind of split your screen between the 2. But also just something to keep in mind when you're doing this with students, that there's going to be a learning curve in getting them ready and helping them kind of flow easily between the 2. Breakout session was a little confusing. I'm hoping that I make it a little bit more clear today, but if not, please make sure you tell me, because I want to make sure that you are using this time or able to use this time productively. So if you're confused, let me know. Maybe a group session with 3 or 4 for the breakout. 7 was a little too much and not everyone participated. I will keep that in mind, and hopefully I'll be able to split you guys up a little bit more evenly. And I just want to encourage everyone to participate because it's helpful to get everyone's ideas. I would have liked to receive feedback or additional guidance on the output. I think this could have been easily made into a 3-hour PD. I think it could have been helpful to have someone in our breakout session who has written a CSW. So I think that I could have made like a whole week's worth of full day PDs out of all of this, but I think my participation would have been really low. So what I want you guys to know is I'm going to stick around afterwards for a while. If you guys have questions, you can stay on Zoom and get feedback, and I can look through some things with you. If you want feedback, I'm more than happy to do that. I am going to keep it at the 2.5 hours to honor the time that people dedicated to this, but I am available afterwards. I'm always available by email. If you have questions or want feedback, I'm happy to help. So just so that you guys know I'm available. All right, and so that brings us to today. We're going to work on grounding these units in relevant and engaging phenomena. All right, so introductions. We're going to use Poll Everywhere today to see how that looks. You guys will see how it looks from a student end, and I'll try to show you what it looks like. Well, you'll see what it looks like from a teacher's end as well. So if you want to open a new browser, you can go to pollev.com. There's also the link in the agenda, and just some things to know that polls can also be answered by text using Poll Everywhere. So students can be on their computer or they can be on their phones. Again, it might be helpful to open 2 separate browsers, one for Zoom, one for Poll Everywhere. An alternate option is Mentimeter, but they do have limited free plans. So if you want to know more about that when you open the slides later, I have links to the details here. And just make sure you leave Poll Everywhere open for the entire session, because we're going to return to it periodically throughout the session. So don't close it down after this poll. All right, so if you look at this slide, it will tell you how to join. You can go to pollev.com/BrittanyHube567, or you can text the number 37607 with the message BrittanyHube567. And then you'll just text your answer. So you guys can see what I'm seeing on the shared screen. And then you can also see what it looks like from the student end on your other browser. If you have questions, feel free to raise your hand or unmute and ask me. Kind of interesting, but I love that you guys are here. So we have quite a few 2 to 5 years, and props to all of you guys who've been teaching for 11 or more years. That's amazing. And please offer any input and experience that you have. All right, so our next poll then is, if I can get it to move, what subject do you teach primarily? Although I've seen this, just so that everybody knows who we have represented here. And if you're looking at my shared screen, it's cool to kind of see this data move in real time. I think that's also cool.
How do you join again with the computer?
With the computer, you go to pollev, so pollev.com.
Oh, and then at the top there, I see it.
Yeah.
Okay, I tried my phone, it wouldn't work. I don't know. I don't have a very good phone.
Huh, okay. You can also text with your phone.
I tried that, yeah.
Oh, you tried, it didn't work. Dang, okay.
It might be my phone.
Okay. Well, it's good to know if it does or doesn't, because we don't want to tell students that it does and then have to suffer through all those technology problems. Awesome. All right. So we have a representation for all the subjects here. That's awesome. All right. And then our next question, if I can get it. If you could build a house anywhere in the world, what setting would you choose? A desert, mountain, valley, beach, etc. Any that you choose. Ooh, a rainforest. I didn't think of that. And so if you guys look at the shared screen, Poll Everywhere gives the option of a word cloud. And so if you haven't heard of a word cloud before, basically the more that an option is chosen, the bigger that word is. So we got a lot of people looking for the mountains and the valleys. Which I would definitely agree with. That would be my choice too. All right, awesome. So we're gonna think a little bit about how we build a house today. So keep this image of where you're gonna build your house in your mind, just to make it more enjoyable, really. Okay. And so our focus questions for today. What are the characteristics of a good anchoring phenomenon? And how does the use of anchoring phenomenon advance student learning? So we are going to, like I said, use some alternatives to Jamboard or Pear Deck today for just quick and simple engagement. And so we're going to use some Zoom features that are simple and basic, but can definitely be employed in the classroom. So we're going to be using the chat feature, and we're going to be using these reaction features over here as well. So if you click the reaction feature, it'll pull up either the option for a clap or a thumbs up, and I'll tell you which one to use to represent different ideas. So what would happen if a house was built on a poor foundation? And so you can send your answer in the chat box, or you can raise your hand and I can call on you to share out. Right, so I think that we are in a lot of agreement that, it might look pretty for a bit, but then would no longer be useful. I think we all agree that it would fall down, right? So over time, it would succumb to the elements and it would collapse. So if we're thinking about that foundation, then as we said, it would collapse. We would start to see cracks, doors would jam, windows would sink, and eventually it would just no longer be useful. So if we're thinking about a foundation, then what are the qualities of a good foundation? And about a house, or just in general, if we're talking about a foundation of something, what are qualities of a good foundation? Yeah, so level, even, quality materials, enforcements, nice, solid, unmovable base, built on a sustainable ground. Absolutely. So I actually looked this up in my research, and these are some of the qualities of a solid foundation. They hold up and hold together the structure, increases the amount of abuse a house structure can take and remain safe for the people inside of it, able to resist the elements, keeps the building steady, prevents subsidence, and lasts for a long time. So these are the qualities, and you guys pretty much put them in there, of a solid foundation, if we're thinking of a solid foundation for building a house on. And as you may have seen on the opening slide, I'm comparing how we build an NGS classroom to how we would build a house. And so this foundation is what's going to hold up this frame, right? And so the foundation needs to be able to resist the elements to keep the building steady, prevent subsidence, and last a long time. And this quote that I thought was helpful is, a house which is just plonked down on bare earth is more likely to be cracked or damaged over time by natural forces. And so although this is engineering and related to science, the way that I'm going to relate it to science is that the foundation is what would the phenomenon, the anchoring phenomenon of a unit would be. And this frame then would represent the science ideas that we are building onto this phenomena. So the phenomenon needs to be solid enough to support these science ideas. Okay, and if we don't have a phenomenon to kind of hold up our science ideas, then, as you guys had said before, it's more likely that those science ideas are going to kind of collapse over time, right? That it might look really good at first and it might seem like the students really understand it, but if we don't have this foundational understanding, then they'll collapse over time. And so that's how we're going to think about an anchoring phenomenon today. So let's talk about what we mean in NGSS terms by phenomenon. All right, so I'm going to give you two different phenomenon types, and you're going to either choose that it is or is not the type of anchoring phenomenon that we're talking about. So phenomenon type 1 demonstrates a previously learned science idea, follows or reinforces science ideas, sounds like a good example of this idea is when the wolves were removed from Yellowstone and all the other wildlife suffered, or let's prove that iron rusts in the presence of oxygen by doing this demonstration. So to vote, you'll clap with your reaction if you do not think this is an example of an anchoring phenomenon, and you'll give me a thumbs up if you think that this is an example of an NGSS anchoring phenomenon. And again, just what you think. There's no right or wrong. I won't kick you out of the meeting. All right, a couple more seconds to send in your reactions. All right, sorry for the person mowing their lawn right outside of my window. I apologize. Hopefully it's not too loud. All right, and then phenomenon type 2, again, you're gonna vote yes or no. Initiate student thinking and questioning, allow science ideas to emerge through investigation. Sounds like when wolves were removed from Yellowstone, there was a decrease in fish populations. Or the water that comes out of Blood Falls is red, but there's not actually any blood there. So again, clap reaction if you think that this is not an anchoring phenomenon. Thumbs up if you think it is an anchoring phenomenon. All right. Great. Thanks. Okay, so these two phenomena are two different types of phenomenon that can be used in a science classroom. Type 1 is not actually an anchoring phenomenon. It's something that we call an illustrative phenomenon. So kind of to show a science idea that was already been discussed or already been taught. And so it's just kind of a side note. It's not actually teaching them the science that they need to know. All right. Phenomenon number 2 is what we call an anchoring phenomenon. It's the phenomena or the phenomenon that we give them in order for the students to learn science ideas and to investigate those science ideas and kind of elicit those on their own. And so in terms of NGSS, we're going to work more with this anchoring phenomenon because it's like building a house on a solid foundation. Illustrative phenomenons are like building a house on no foundation. They're more likely the science ideas that are linked to illustrative phenomenon are more likely to collapse or to fall down or to be lost over time. Whereas when we build science ideas and science understanding on an anchoring phenomenon, it's more likely to last for a longer period of time, that actual understanding that students have. So the qualities of a good anchoring phenomenon. Atlas.com says that phenomena are observable events in nature that anchor a unit and motivate students to utilize science skills and knowledge to reach a deeper, multidimensional understanding. And so if we look at NGSS and what they say is, oh, there it is, okay. The qualities of a good anchor phenomenon. All right, can everybody see this screen? Okay. So instructional sequences are more coherent when students investigate compelling natural phenomena in science or work on meaningful design problems in engineering by engaging in the science and engineering practices. We refer to these phenomena and design problems here as anchors. What makes for a good phenomenon to anchor an investigation? And so I'm going to just put this on my screen and let you read through it. And so then what I'm going to have you do on the poll everywhere is to tell me what qualities stood out to you or do you believe are most important from that list of anchoring phenomena or qualities of an anchoring phenomenon. Yeah, so I'm seeing lots of that observable and relevant, which is super important and also probably the most difficult part. Involves an actual case with data. Yeah. Great. So those are some of the features that we're going to work with today in figuring out how we do that. And I will say that some of it, especially this part with the data and stuff, is going to come in tomorrow. So today and tomorrow are really closely linked. Like I said, I could have made a whole week worth of whole day PDs out of this information, but this is like a crash course on it. So we're going to use today and tomorrow to hopefully get our bearings. So we're going to talk about some examples and some non-examples to see if we understand what an anchoring phenomenon is. So the first example, and you're going to be using Poll Everywhere to vote, is ecosystems. So you're going to decide if you think this is a phenomenon, an anchoring phenomenon, or if it is not an anchoring phenomenon based on those qualities that we talked about.
Well, just for clarity, the phenomenon is just ecosystems as a whole?
Yeah, yes, just that. If I said my anchoring phenomenon is ecosystems, yeah.
Okay, lovely, thank you.
Yep. And again, if you guys want to see those qualities, I know they're not on my screen, but if you go to the agenda, I've put the link in there so that you can open that tab up if you need to re-reference that. Okay. So ecosystems in itself is actually not a phenomenon. And so the reason that we say it is not a phenomenon is, one, it's just not a complete idea. If you just say to students, okay, we're going to be studying ecosystems, that's not really an idea. It's a unit of study. And so it's not as engaging for them. It's not likely to elicit questions. Maybe a few, but not as many as if we gave them some kind of like conundrum, like something about ecosystems. And so ecosystems is a unit of study within which we would choose an anchoring phenomenon for students to learn. So another one, the introduction of zebra mussels to the Hudson River significantly decreased the health of the ecosystem. So on Poll Everywhere, what do you think about this one? Phenomenon, not a phenomenon, or I have no idea? Yeah. All right, so yeah, we would say that this one is a phenomenon because it's going to elicit some questions from students, like why. A lot of times our anchoring phenomenon should elicit just a why question from students. It can include multiple performance expectations or standards and science ideas, so we can spend a couple days talking about that, or a couple lessons. And it cannot be answered in one lesson. It's going to take, yeah, sorry, I got distracted by the chat. Yeah. So Michael, that's a good um a good thought, and I agree. The drawback is that the context may not be relevant or local. So although it is an example of an anchoring phenomenon, I'm not saying it is the best anchoring phenomenon. And we'll talk about how to choose a better anchoring phenomenon. But right now, what we need to do first is make sure we understand the difference between an anchoring phenomenon and a illustrative phenomenon or a not phenomenon. So, Michael, I completely agree, and thank you for sharing. I don't know that it would be the most enthralling for students either. So let's try another one. Ecosystems can be disrupted by natural events and by human-made events. Great, we're catching on quick. So we would say that this is not a phenomenon. It's not likely to elicit very many questions. It's not really broad enough. It's not going to include multiple performance expectations or science ideas. It really is a science idea. And we'll talk more about what a science idea is later on in this PD. But this is more of a science idea that they might learn while investigating an anchoring phenomenon. So let's try another one. The zebra mussel population in the Hudson River grew exponentially over 5 years, but the size of individual mussels decreased. Okay, we got it. It is a phenomenon. It is going to elicit some questions. It includes multiple P's and science ideas. It cannot be answered in one lesson. The drawback, again, the context may not be relevant to those students. So making it engaging and relevant is going to be the more challenging part of choosing an anchoring phenomenon. Holly's parents wonder how to deal with the insects that are damaging their crops. Okay. So this one is a challenging one. We would say that it's not an anchoring phenomenon because it's not likely to elicit many questions. It really more is solution oriented. It's not really focused on the science ideas as much. We say that this is a problem, but it could stem from a phenomenon. So within an anchoring phenomenon, this could be a smaller part for students to investigate. Or a problem for them to solve at the end based on what they learned from an anchoring phenomenon. But this in itself is a little too focused or a little too narrow for it to be an anchoring phenomenon. Okay, how does the amount of snowfall in Yellowstone affect the elk and wolf populations? All right. We're pretty split on this one. So technically, this is not a phenomenon because, and it's a technicality, questions alone are not considered phenomenon because they do not describe what is to be explained. The statement could be rephrased to become a phenomenon. And what we would call this, what the part in the lesson that we would call this would be like a focus question or a unit central question or a driving question that we give students after they have observed the anchoring phenomenon. Okay. And again, it's kind of a technicality, but the anchoring phenomenon itself, we write in like a statement that is going to elicit questions from students. All right, organisms interact with their environment and other organisms. All right, that one was an easy one. So not a phenomenon. It's not likely to elicit questions. Not broad enough. It does not include multiple PEs or science ideas. This is a science idea. So this is something that we might want students to learn while investigating an anchoring phenomenon, but it in itself is not an anchoring phenomenon. All right. There are fewer carnivores than herbivores and fewer herbivores than producers in a food web. All right. So yeah, this one is considered a phenomenon because it could elicit some questions like why, and it does include multiple PEs and science ideas. It cannot be answered in one lesson. There are multiple science ideas that are going to have to be explored. Again, the drawback is that the context is vague. So while this could be an anchoring phenomenon, we would want to find more of an example of this within the world instead of just giving this to students because it's not likely to be very engaging. Okay, so what ahas did you have during this activity? What things did you maybe learn or find interesting or not find interesting? Questions? Great, thanks. Love those. Those are nice. Yes, it definitely is a skill to write good phenomena. And I will say that I understand that as a teacher, we don't really have the time to do that. And so today we're really going to focus on analyzing developed units to determine if they do have a good phenomenon or not. And then kind of how to make a few adjustments to improve those if they're not good. Yes, and it is super important that it is relevant to the students. It is helpful in answering that question, why do we have to know this? Or why does this even matter to us? So examples may be good, Yes, but they're not always phenomena. And so instead of using those side examples to say, okay, here's all the science and this is how it applies, we say, this is real life. What is the science behind it? And so we kind of give students an opportunity to see that science exists in so many different places within the world, pretty much everywhere. Okay, so if I can get this to move on. So how do we do it? So we're going to think of an analogy. Just go back to our analogy really quick. It helps me. Maybe analogies don't help you. And if they don't, we'll move on quick. But so we said that this foundation is the phenomenon. And we said that the frame is those science ideas that students are going to be building on with the phenomenon. And so the builders, the people that are constructing this house, should be the students, not the teacher. So the students should be the ones that are putting these science ideas on from this phenomenon and that are connecting those science ideas. Okay. So the elements, the things that threaten to knock this house over, are student misconceptions, those common student ideas. And so if we allow students to build those conceptions into this framework, then it's no longer steady. And so that's something that we have to consider as we're building, as we're choosing this phenomenon and we're laying this foundation, is the student misconceptions that are going to arise, and how we're going to keep those from being built into the framework and threatening that stable frame. And so the teacher takes on a different role then. The teacher is not building this house. The teacher is like the foreman. The teacher is giving them the materials they need to build this, but the teacher is not the one that should be building this. They choose where the foundation should be laid. They choose how it should look, but they don't actually build it. All right. And so the tools then that those students are going to use to build this are the SEPs, those science and engineering practices. And that's what next session is going to focus on, is how we teach the students to use those tools to build that their understanding. All right, and so today we're going to focus on this foundation and how we lay it and how we get the students to build science ideas onto it. So some things that we would consider if we were laying a foundation. Where does a foundation need to be laid? How big does the foundation need to be? What do the builders need to construct the frame? What is the foundation's role in the end of construction? Can it still be seen? And so if we think about these questions in terms of teaching with an anchoring phenomenon, what does this mean for us when we're choosing a phenomenon for a unit? And you're going to put these in a poll everywhere, but just if we're thinking about the foundation as the phenomenon and the builders as the students and the frame as the science ideas, what kind of things do we need to consider when we're either developing an anchoring phenomenon or choosing one from a pre-developed unit? Yes. The phenomenon should require all of the science ideas you're hoping to teach in the unit without including any unnecessary understandings. Must be relevant to the topic and relevant to students. Students have the skills to build it. It's observable and lends itself to questions that can be investigated by students. I love it. You guys are onto it. Perfect. So let's get started in the steps to developing a unit with an anchoring phenomenon. All right. And so as we go through this, the process that we're going to use, there's five steps. We're going to read the step. I'm going to show you an example from my unit planning. And then you're going to find and analyze it in your model unit that I found for you using an app called Kami. And so Kami looks like this. It's a site that you can use to upload and annotate documents that you've saved in your Google Drive. And it's collaborative between multiple people. So anybody who has the link can collaborate on it. It's like a Google Doc, but it has a lot more features. So over here on the side, when you open this, you'll find all the features. And so I am going to give you just a minute to interact with Kami a little bit. So to access your model unit, if you see the links in the elaborate section box of the agenda, I've highlighted the model units yellow. So there's a model unit for chemistry, one for biology, one for physics. And so if you click on that link, it'll take you to Kami. And I've I've annotated it a little bit just so you can see what some of the features are. So I'll give you a minute to do that. Yes, Cami, right, there's a free trial right now. I believe that from what I remember, I looked at a lot of apps. There is a free option always, but some of the features are paid. So there's a free 60-day trial for all the features, and then after that, it's a limited free subscription. All right, take just a couple seconds. Oh, a free for 30 days. Okay. I wonder if I'll have to check on that. I'm gonna write it down and check. I don't know if it was different with if I just had a different option, but let me write it down and I'll check to make sure. Okay. So, yes, click open from Google Drive. So our first step is to determine the phenomena or the performance expectations or PEs and the disciplinary core ideas or DCIs that the unit will be addressing. And these are the NGSS terms that we use. And so what that would look like if I was planning a unit on an ecology unit, okay? Here are all of the performance expectations that are listed for my ecology unit. And there are a lot of them. All right. So I would write them all down. I would include the description for the PE. And then I would look at each PE in the NGSS framework and look at the disciplinary core ideas that are underneath each of those. All right. And so you do not have to do this, but what I am going to have you do is that within your CAMI document, I want you to look and find what the listed PEs and DCIs are in your model unit. All right. And so just a note that everyone in your content is sharing the same CAMI document. It's collaborative. So any comments or annotations that you make are going to be public. Just so that you're aware. It's okay to comment on them. It may help people that are looking through it as well. So just look to see if you can find the PEs and DCIs in your model unit. And when you're finished, just give me a thumbs up so that I know when most people are ready to move on. Yeah. So you're going to want to open that CAMI document and then look for the performance expectations and the DCIs that are part of that unit. They should be listed in there, but for everybody, they're going to be listed in different places because different people develop it. So just making sure we look and find what PEs and DCIs this unit's supposed to cover. All right, and so the next thing that we have to do, and this one is the one that takes a little bit more thought, is to record all of the important science ideas that students will need to understand in this unit. And so the one thing we need to do is make sure that we are all on the same page with what a science idea is. So we can define a science idea as a complete sentence or more that describes knowledge that a student can learn. And so some examples are populations of organisms change over time or evolve. That's a science idea that we would teach during our natural selection unit. Or the Earth is tilted to its orbital plane by an angle of approximately 23.5 degrees. All right, these are examples of science ideas. Now, if we look at this example, I have made a partial example of how this can be done. If I can get it to load, give me a second. All right, so I've made a template for you guys that will look similar to this. If we're looking at science ideas, let's look at, so I've listed my DCI over here on the left, okay? And in the middle here, I've listed my science ideas. Now, this is kind of a representation of what actually happened when I was planning this with my PLC. We went through and we listed what we thought the science ideas were. And then we gave it to the people at BSCS that we were working with. And here's some of the feedback that they gave us. So the DCI is photosynthesis and cellular respiration, including aerobic or anaerobic processes, provide most of the energy for life processes. And so we said photosynthesis is the process of converting light energy into glucose. And they said, is this statement accurate? It sounds like energy is being converted into matter. And so should we say that photosynthesis is the process of converting light energy into chemical energy found within the molecule of glucose? And so that's important because as teachers, if this is what we're thinking, then this is what we're saying. And so there's confusion that's being given to students, or the possibility for confusion. And so that's something to keep in mind as we're writing out science ideas, is making sure that we're being as scientifically accurate as possible. And so the next one we said, cellular respiration is the process of converting chemical energy in glucose into ATP. And this was something that took us a long time to get over as biology teachers, for those of you who have taught biology. The standard does not include ATP. Our old standards, our quality core standards, included ATP. But NGSS does not say anything about ATP. It's outside of the boundary. And so we needed to figure out what exactly students needed to know. We had to look at that PE. We had to look at the assessment boundaries. We had to look at the DCI. And what we determined was really cellular respiration, what NGSS is looking for students to understand, is that cellular respiration is the process of converting chemical energy within a molecule of glucose into a usable form of chemical energy. So what we really needed them to know is that there are different forms of chemical energy, and some can be used and some cannot. And cellular respiration was what made that energy, that chemical energy, usable. And so that shifted our entire focus on how we were teaching this and what we were focusing on with our students, because we no longer needed them to know that ATP part, because that's really more of like the way we were teaching it was more of an illustrative kind of example. It was something that they had to memorize and spit back out, and they didn't really understand it. And so that means that we took out this whole ATP is a cellular currency of the cell, which is something that we used to teach them, because it's no longer within our standards. And so that's a shift that some of us are still making. Is we've taught this for a while, we've taught quality core, we've taught all these standards, and we're trying to fit those into NGSS. And that can be really difficult when it's not meant to be a part of NGSS. And so that's something that I encourage you to think about as you're looking at the science ideas that are included within your units or coming up with science ideas. And again, down here, aerobic respiration occurs in the presence of oxygen, anaerobic respiration occurs in the absence of oxygen. Although it's not necessarily false, would it be more accurate to say that aerobic respiration uses oxygen as a reactant, while anaerobic respiration does not use oxygen as a reactant? And so it's important for us as teachers to lay these science ideas out in a scientifically accurate way and in a way that's aligned with the standards, so that it makes our development of a unit and our teaching of a unit streamlined for students. And so what I am going to have you do now is look at your unit. And does your model unit have science ideas listed, or is it a comprehensive list? Do you agree with the science ideas listed? Are they accurate? Are they aligned with the PEs? You can add comments to the document to discuss with your collaborators. So if there's something you think should be added, or if there's something that you think shouldn't be there or isn't aligned, go ahead and add those comments. And it'll foster some discussion on your collaborative task later. So the next step in this unit then would be to choose the phenomenon that will be used. So once we know the science ideas that students need from this, we're going to choose the phenomenon that would be used and give it context. So make it engaging to our students. And so, for example, with this ecology unit, we decided on a terrarium. All right, so a terrarium sealed for 47 years is still sustaining plant life and soil organisms. And this is this was a news article and stuff that was given in England. The drawback is that it's not really local. So something that we decided to do was to create a terrarium in our room. We made a little terrarium in our classrooms so that students could actually observe that and watch that as we went. Another option is to do like little bottle gardens. So they make their own little bottle gardens, and so they have that they can observe as they go. And so those were, that was how we did this ecology unit. Now, something that we thought about as we were deciding on phenomenon is any misconceptions that might arise during the phenomenon. Will they be easily addressed? How will they be addressed? And what are the costs and benefits? There were other phenomenon that we had considered, and the costs kind of outweighed the benefits. And so we settled on this terrarium model. So an NTI option that I thought of, because this is probably a unit that we're going to teach, is to create a terrarium at my house. I could take a video of me creating the terrarium to share with my students. I could share photos every week of my terrarium, or I could give students instructions on how to create a bottle garden at their own house. And so that's a way to kind of get them involved in the science, even from a distance. And that's the reality of what we have to do now. And so that's something that I'm going to have you consider as you review your model unit. Does your model unit have an anchoring phenomenon? If not, what are some phenomena that may be fitting for this collection of PEs and DCIs? And if yes, will it be relevant or engaging for your students? Can you think of a way to engage them with this phenomenon virtually? And so one thing I will say, the next step is to think about what PEs and DCIs aren't covered. So you may choose a phenomenon that you feel like cover a good portion of your PEs, but not all of them, or maybe half, but not the other half. And that's still okay, because it's hard to find a phenomenon that's going to cover all of the units PEs, but maybe you break them down into two smaller units. So just look at what the anchoring phenomena is. See if you think it's fitting for the listed PEs and DCIs, and see if you can think of any ways that you could make this engaging to students virtually as well.
I'm sorry, could you remind me what a PE stands for?
Yeah, it stands for a performance expectation.
Oh.
And I think I forgot to say this earlier. There should be a link in the agenda to like all the acronyms, the NGSS acronyms, because there are like 1,000 of them. And so I think I put that link in the agenda because I know with education, you just throw out acronyms, like candy. So that may be helpful if you guys can find, if I didn't, let me know and I can send it. So I'm going to have you still work with the CAMI. So that model unit that I gave you via CAMI, and the link for the acronyms should be in the agenda. Michael, were you able to find it in the agenda? The link to the acronyms, or did you not look? I can look.
So it was there.
Okay, awesome. Great. So the link for all
it's
of
there
the...
under, I was going to say it's there under elaborate, I think.
Under elaborate. Awesome. Okay, thank you. All right. So like I said, the next step would be to determine which PEs or DCIs or science ideas can be addressed in this unit with the phenomenon we've chosen. We don't want to choose a phenomenon that's only going to address like one PE, but like I said, it's going to be hard to find a phenomenon that addresses all the PEs within one unit. And so what we do after we've chosen this phenomenon that we feel like is applicable and acceptable, we're going to go back and we're going to look at the PEs and the DCIs and the SIs that were listed, and we're going to decide which ones we think are addressed. So with this terrarium, we addressed these three PEs. And so we knew that we were able to hit all three of these PEs along with a couple others, which we'll talk about in a second. But these other ones we weren't able to hit with this terrarium. And so we designed another unit. And so our ecology unit had two anchoring phenomena. We did one with the terrarium, and then we did another with the wolves of Yellowstone, which hit these other PEs. And so it's possible even that you might have to have three. It just really determines on the PE that, or on the phenomenon that you choose. We just need to make sure that we're not forcing it, and that we're choosing something that is worth our time and worth our while. And so if we look at this, again, the example that I have given you, we can see that up here, I highlighted the ones that I knew I was going to cover, and I just crossed out or struck through the ones that weren't covered within this unit or this phenomenon. I put in red all of the DCIs and science ideas and common student ideas that aren't going to be covered in this unit. And then I put in green the ones that are. And so that's just easy for me when I, go to look for my next ecology phenomenon to look for, to know which PEs and which DCIs need to be covered. And so it's important to keep in mind because we don't want to skip a PE, but we also don't want to force it into a phenomenon that's really solid, but just doesn't cover that one PE. And so what you are going to do in that model unit, again, that CAMI, just check and make sure, are all the PEs and DCIs that are listed, are they addressed completely by this phenomenon? Take note if small parts aren't, that might be something that you incorporate into a separate unit. Which PEs and DCIs that are typically grouped with the ones in this unit will need to be included in a different unit? And are there any additional PEs or DCIs that could be incorporated into this phenomenon? Okay, and so the last thing we need to do, and this is the most challenging and also the most fun part, is to develop a storyline of science ideas and a driving question or a unit central question for our anchoring phenomenon and our unit. And so what that is going to look like, a storyline, is the order in which students will learn and understand the new science ideas. It's not the story about the phenomenon. It's kind of how we're going to tell the science story, okay? And so it allows students to see connections between multiple science ideas within and between lessons. So like if you were writing a book, like which characters are going to be introduced in what order so that their relationships make sense to the reader. So we usually begin units with science ideas with which students may already be familiar, or science ideas that are likely to answer some of their first questions about the anchoring phenomenon. And then we're going to add a couple science ideas with each lesson. So little by little, they're building on to this story. We need to make sure that science ideas in each lesson are easily tied to science ideas from the previous lesson, or else it's going to be a jumbled mess and students won't understand how they link together. And so this is where the planning comes in, and the pre-planning or the backwards planning about what's going to make the most sense to students as far as the science ideas. Now, there's a really intense graphic here that I want to discuss because it's very helpful when we're thinking about designing science ideas. And so it comes from this site called Next Gen Storylines. And they say that a storyline is a coherent sequence of lessons in which each step is driven by students' questions that arise from their interactions with phenomenon, which I know somebody said earlier when we were talking about the qualities of an anchoring phenomenon. A student's goal should always be to explain a phenomenon or solve a problem. At each step, students make progress on the classroom's questions through science and engineering practices to figure out a piece of a science idea. This last part is what we're going to talk about tomorrow. But this graphic is showing us how it works. So we introduce students to an anchoring phenomenon, and then we have them attempt to make sense of it using some of our science and engineering practices. They may identify some related phenomenon that remind them of this anchoring phenomenon, and then they develop these questions, right? And so we plan then, based on their questions, what's going to come next. And so then we'll have their questions. We'll pre-plan what questions we think they'll ask, which one we think we can answer first or should be answered first. And then we'll have some kind of mini phenomenon. It could be some data, it could be a model, it could be an investigation, could be a lab, and they'll use their science idea or their science and engineering practices to investigate this phenomenon, and they'll figure something out. They'll come across some science idea, okay? And they'll keep that science idea in their mind, and they'll do another investigation of another one to answer another one of those questions. They'll use their science ideas, they'll figure something else out. And then they'll get down here to this putting the pieces together, and they'll start working on how those science ideas that they've learned now link to each other and how they link back to that anchoring phenomenon that they learned about. So for example, they may learn in the anchoring phenomenon, they may look at some pictures of animals, and they may see that the individual organisms have characteristics that are different from other individuals in the same species. That may be what they notice, and that may be the anchoring phenomenon. This is a unit that was given to us by BSCS for ecology. So they looked at jaguars and they realized they could be black or they could be spotted. They looked at mosquitoes and they realized that they could be insecticide resistant or not. They looked at geese and saw that they had different types of hemoglobin, so that would allow them to fly at different heights or altitudes. And so that's what they learned. And so they were like, but why? How are some of them black? How are some of them spotted? Da, 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 da. And so then we looked at some data. And from that, they found out that the characteristics of an organism are the result of the proteins in that organism. And so they were like, oh, okay, but then why are their proteins different? And so then our next investigation, our next lesson, they figured out that the structures of the proteins allow it to function. And if you change the structure, it may not function the same way. Okay, and so now we have to put all of that information together to get us one step closer to answering that unit central question or that anchoring phenomenon. And so we know that individual organisms within a species have different levels of proteins and proteins with different structures, which leads to differences in traits. But now their next question is, why do they have these differences in proteins and these differences in the structures? And so then our next step is to investigate the link between DNA and proteins. And so we slowly build on to this storyline. And so they're constructing their own explanation through these investigations. And they're pulling out science ideas with each investigation that are going to eventually lead them back to explaining this anchoring phenomenon that they started with. So are there questions about the storyline? Because this is a complicated piece. It's the most challenging piece, but it is the most fruitful piece. So before I give you time to go, are there any just questions right now? Okay, great. So the example in our terrarium model, this is how we laid out our storyline. They started by just talking about a system. It has boundaries, components, interactions. The terrarium represents a closed system. A plant within the terrarium is another system. Then we learned that those plants use chemical reactions called photosynthesis to separate atoms of water and carbon dioxide molecules and connect those atoms in different arrangements. We learned that we can trace those atoms used in photosynthesis. And then when we traced them, we found that those glucose molecules are composed of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And then we found that that oxygen that comes out from that glucose, or comes from the breakdown of water, which is an input. And so we slowly build onto this story that we're creating of science ideas. And so at the end, the students now have all of this, this whole story that they can kind of tell in their explanations. And so as teachers, we have to decide how that story should develop in order to make the most sense to students. And so you're going to now look at that CAMI doc with your model unit and think, does the storyline start with science ideas that will answer some of those students' initial questions? So what questions do you think students will ask first? And if not, how can it be rewritten to do so? And is the storyline focused on the science ideas, or is it focused on the phenomenon? Because remember, the phenomenon is just the foundation. In the end, we don't really want to see the phenomenon. We want the science ideas. And will the storyline make sense to the students? Are there any gaps where maybe the students might not understand the jump from one science idea to the next? So take some time to look over that. And again, you can add comments to that CAMI doc to foster some conversation with your group that you can further when we get into our breakout groups shortly. I see some people have added to the CAMI some comments and stuff. That's awesome. I think that'll be very helpful. And I'm hoping that those units that I posted in there are something that maybe you feel like you can implement when you get to that part of the curriculum this year. I know it's not your first unit of instruction. You guys will be working on that later, but I tried to find some model ones that I feel like would at least be a good starting point for instruction. And so we're going to go to Pull Everywhere. And I want you to think about what you see as the biggest benefit of teaching a unit with an anchoring phenomenon and a content storyline. This feature of Pull Everywhere allows you to upvote responses. So when you see people's responses, if you agree with them, you can upvote them, which will take it higher to the top. So just another feature that I wanted you guys to be able to experiment with. I love it. Yeah, these are awesome. So the lessons seem relevant to each other. So it's definitely helpful for students to see that connection and to feel like every day they're doing something that can be used again. This one about it's easy to follow and allow students to make chronological connections, that is what I've seen as the biggest benefit, is that students can, which is what this says down here, use it each day. So like they come in and they're like, okay, well, like what's going on with the terrarium? Or, you know, like we used a population of stickleback fish in our natural selection unit. And so every day they came in and they knew that they were learning about the stickleback fish, and they knew like where we were at in the story. And so where we were going. And so they felt that connection. So it wasn't like each day they came in and they're like, whoa, okay, like give me time to adjust to what we're learning today. I had no idea. And so that feeling of kind of connection every day can be really helpful for engagement as well. Even for students that are maybe chronically absent, it's helpful when they come back. I've found they're like, oh, well, we're still learning about these fish. And I'm like, we are. Like, this is what we've learned about while you were gone. Like, here's what we've added to the story. And they're like, oh, okay. But like, I already knew this part. I'm like, yeah, you've been gone a week and you still know something about what we're learning. Like, that's really fantastic. And so it helps with that engagement for students that are there every day, but also for students that aren't there every day. And I see that being really helpful virtually as well. If you can present it like a story, it's much easier to keep up with what's going on in a story than just independent little ideas every day. So really good ideas about how this can be beneficial. So the last question I have before we get into our breakout groups, how then do we know if students have understood the science ideas and the links between the science ideas at the end of the unit? I love it. These are great. So the cool and challenging thing about NGSS is that we don't really just give a multiple choice test at the end. Students wonder and ask higher level questions. Right. So we're going to give them more of a task for a summative assessment. And so a lot of times with NGSS, we can give them a task to apply those science ideas to another phenomenon. So it's like taking up this whole house and plopping it down on another phenomenon, and it should still stand. It should still be solid there. And so students can take all those science ideas they've learned, and then they can explain a new phenomenon that we give them that uses those or that encompasses those same science ideas. So like a really common example is, I'm sorry that I give so many biology examples. I know it's annoying, my safe space, but we taught natural selection using the stickleback population, and then we gave them all the data for the finches on the Galapagos Islands, which they had all told me that they already had learned. And so I was able to say, okay, you learned it in middle school. Now, can you take all these science ideas we learned and explain what happened on the Galapagos Islands with this finch population and explain this data? And that was how I was able to really gauge whether or not they knew the science ideas and they knew how those science ideas were working in the natural world. And so that's kind of the new form of assessment, what we call use and apply, is choosing another phenomenon that's very similar and asking them to use their understanding to either explain that or to draw a model of it. There are lots of different ways, but that assessment looks a little different now because they have a much deeper understanding of these science ideas. Great. So the research. Here are some quotes that I found that I think are very telling of storyline development and anchoring phenomenon. So as I read them, just think about which ones really resonate with you. Questions are the engine that drive science and engineering. Using scientifically based research methods required to establish causality, the study found that students receiving inquiry-based instruction reached significantly higher levels of achievement than students experiencing commonplace instruction. The inquiry-based approach avoids intellectual bulimia, in which students just learn words to spit back out on a test. By teaching them the reasoning process, they get a deeper understanding of science concepts. Anchoring phenomena can help you organize your instruction over multiple lessons and help students understand that everything they are doing has a larger purpose. They're keeping their eyes on the horizon. And even for experienced teachers, coming up with anchoring events requires extra reading, a constant focus on learning goals, and regular reflection on how those learning goals match up with big science ideas. The process will test your content knowledge to its limits and inevitably push you to deepen your understanding of even the most fundamental ideas of science. So choose a number of which one resonates the most with you at the current moment, and let me know here. I will say I love that E is getting such high ratings because that was the one that resonated the most with me. I don't know about you guys, but I'm like a huge science nerd. Like I always want to learn more science. And so it kind of presents a really fun opportunity for me to learn about cool things that are going on that I feel like I don't think about as much anymore that I'm teaching. And being able to kind of experience that with students can be really encouraging. So I'm glad that I have a few fellow science nerds in my presence. All right, so preparing to develop a content storyline. First, you're going to access the first unit of instruction. It's highlighted orange in your agenda. Okay, this is the first unit as identified by JCPS. As a group, you will determine the following: the performance expectations, the DCIs, and the science ideas. What is the anchoring phenomenon? what is the storyline, and what is the unit central question? What is the big question that students are going to try to answer throughout this entire unit? And I've created an anchoring phenomenon / storyline planning template. Each of you have one. It's highlighted in green. You do not necessarily have to fill this out. I am not going to be grading you on it, but I think that it's helpful to kind of guide your discussion. So you'll go through this first unit of instruction together and look for these features. Now, our kind of end goal of this is to lay out something that looks like this. We have a phenomenon. We have the unit overarching goal. What students should be able to say at the end. And then each lesson, we've kind of we've laid out what they need to know, what question they're going to answer, how they're going to build onto the content storyline, and then what we're going to talk about tomorrow, the activities they're going to do to get there. So we're not going to do this today, but just this is kind of what our end goal is, and this is what we're looking for when we are trying to find unit-based and anchoring phenomenon. So as you work, you might want to think about student misconceptions that might arise from the phenomenon or the activities. Is this phenomenon strong enough to counter those misconceptions? And what aspects of the phenomenon need to be highlighted in order to move student thinking past a misconception? All right, so you're going to have a 5-minute transition. You're going to be planning in your breakout groups. Open your first unit of instruction. It's going to be a Kami doc, but you guys will also be in your breakout groups. So you'll have Zoom discussion available. Use that anchoring phenomenon storyline to help guide you. And we're going to return to whole group at 11:15. Any questions before I break you out? Okay. And remember that you can always ask for help in your breakout groups using that question mark and invite host. Alrighty then. I wanted to give you guys something to work with because it's hard to find. Now I do have, if you look at the bottom of the agenda, I did find 2 other units that I think could be, oh wait, nope, that's for chemistry. That's not for physics. I lied. I apologize. So what do you guys think? How do you guys feel about those standards? Do you feel like they can be incorporated into a unit you already teach?
Well, I'm kind of in an outlier situation because I teach AP Physics 1, and that's not part of the curriculum.
For AP Physics.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Gotcha.
I don't know if I'm going to be
helpful on that. Okay.
Yeah.
Ron, what about you? Are you the same boat?
I have 2 classes of AP Physics 1.
Okay.
This would be over at a freshman physics.
Yeah, which is what it is for the regular district. And then Michael, what about you?
So we were discussing this in my PLC, and we think that this would be adjacent to the Earth Science unit.
Okay.
And I'm in the fun position of, I guess, teach chemistry as well. And so we were sort of giving, this seems to sort of take some of the water stuff from chemistry.
Okay.
And so we were sort of doing sort of a similar idea to this, though I actually like the barnacles as like a phenomena to send this around.
Okay.
We know a lot about like freezing and water, which would then take some of the pressure off of chemistry. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I guess let's see. Ron, and do you go by Diane or Patricia?
Diane, yeah.
Diane, okay. Yeah. Is there any overlap, do you know, between what you teach in AP and what the general standards for the districts? Like,
well, I mean, there's the whole unit on kinematics that we do, and we do energy as well.
okay. And
So,
do you have a phenomenon for that?
Not off the top of my head. Just
okay. No. I meant,
Yeah.
did you already teach it with a phenomenon or not? I figured probably no. Okay.
No, because we go by College Board.
Right. They're putting some of that in there. I know for AP Bio, they've started with the phenomenon. They're trying. They're not great at it yet, but they're trying.
Yeah. No, it's not.
We
That's
did
not been a thing so far.
Gotcha. Michael, what?
We and it was poorly executed, but I thought a good idea. Last year, which was my first year, we did a like water rocket launch as a kinematics phenomenon.
Okay.
We had students like build and calculate how much pressure was going to be in it, and then calculate the force and calculate the acceleration and calculate that sort of thing. It was kind of a hot mess, but I thought it was a good idea and concept.
Yeah. So I see that as being like a performance task at the end of a unit, like if they can build and develop that. However, it could stem from an anchoring phenomenon about, and I will be completely honest with you, I am not great with the physics standards. So you can just tell me no if it's not a good idea. But if there is an opportunity there for an anchoring phenomenon within rockets themselves, something to do with rockets themselves. I know NASA just launched, or not NASA and that first private launch. SpaceX. SpaceX. So I don't know if that is something where you could find a phenomenon in that, and then you would already have a performance task for the end, which is to use those science ideas to build and develop something. Then you're putting those engineering practices in as well. But again, I don't know all of the standards that fall within that unit. So what are your thoughts?
Well, it would be relevant for sure.
Okay.
For what's going on in current events and so forth.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about forces, you're looking at the acceleration due to gravity, and also when there is no, well, I shouldn't say no, but when gravity's
minimal
acceleration rate has been reduced significantly, because
yeah. And I see that being an opportunity as an anchoring phenomena for AP physics, because you can get real advanced in those ideas, but you can also stay general if you're doing just the general physics. You don't have to get into all of it for it to still be applicable and for it to still be something that they can explain better at the end of the unit. So I think that could be an anchoring phenomenon. How do you guys feel like you could frame that to be something that would elicit questions from students? Take some time to think. It's not like a...
Yeah.
Could you do something about how like rockets need a tremendous amount of fuel to get out of the Earth and then continue going at the same speed or relatively the same speed for essentially forever after leaving the Earth's orbit? Would that be an interesting
Yeah, I was so thinking along that way. Only I was thinking about how can you take something that's so incredibly heavy and get it out of the Earth's atmosphere, let alone getting it off the Earth's surface?
I was thinking of that. Like when I jump, I don't stay up very long, but this rocket, it gets out there and then it just stays out there. So that could be, and sometimes what I do is I just find an interesting statistic or an interesting number or just something that is what? It just doesn't, where there's a lot of science in between that you leave out. So for example, for me, I'm reading a book right now called The Serengeti Rules, and it talks about how this virus that was infecting buffalo, once it was gone, allowed for the trees to grow higher. And so you can present it like that. How does getting rid of, or when this, if I was going to frame it as an anchoring phenomenon, when this disease was eradicated from the buffalo, the trees grew higher, there were more giraffes, and what was another one?
Sorry.
And there were more butterflies. Now there's a whole lot of science that I left out in the middle, but that's what makes it interesting, is they're like, well, why? And now I have this whole phenomenon that we can talk about and we can explain. And it's very simple when we know it, but they don't know that science yet, And so if you think about what you guys are talking about and you just take some of the science out and give them just a snippet, that's the anchoring phenomenon, where they can be like, what, why, how, and now you have that storyline. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So if you can think of a way to phrase it so that it seems crazy and impossible, but not so much once you know the science. I tell my kids all the time, science ruins all the magic in the world. Nothing's magical after you know science.
Doesn't stop being magic just because you know
It's true. It's still super cool. But so do you guys feel like you can so what do you need from me? What can I do to help start this off?
So are the science ideas on this rocket thing, Newton's third law and Newton's law of gravitational force, and then we build experiments on top of that, and then come back to this anchoring idea?
So I think that you just gave me a good idea. If you guys look at that template, that planning template, it might be good to start there, because like you said, your question is, what are all the science ideas and what's going to be the flow? And so maybe starting to work through that would be a good place to start, knowing that your anchoring phenomenon can be any rocket launch. And so you could start with your anchoring phenomenon, or you could find plenty of resources to ground that phenomenon in. Do you think that's a good place to start with that template? Yes, you can tell me no.
I have to find it.
Okay. It should be in the agenda, and the link is green.
I can shove the standards in pretty easily. I've worked if that's
Okay.
helpful.
Yeah, and you guys can, Diane and Ron can add in the AP standards if you want to split that into two, split that one PE box into two, and so you can kind of keep a running log for both.
Yeah, good call. Good call. I'll do that right now. No one minds.
Okay. Is it cool if I check in with the other groups? Or you guys feel like you got a good start?
You're good.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Brittany.
Thanks, guys.
Rearranged.
How's it going, guys?
Slow boat.
Slow, you said? Okay. Productive but slow?
Yeah, I'd say productive.
Okay.
We're all kind of getting the feel for this, and personally, it's due to inexperience on my part.
Well, I will say that this is new. Like, this is a very new way of teaching in general. So, NGSS standards are new, and then this way of teaching is pretty much even newer than that. So, don't
Right.
feel you should know more. That's kind of the point of this, is to kind of get our feet wet with it.
Right. From my understanding, we're trying to incorporate this to enhance student knowledge, of course, and generate those types of questions that come from high-level thinking.
Yeah.
And trying to put it into a readable format that's easy for us and the students to follow.
Right, exactly. And that whole template that I kind of laid out, I think is very helpful for me, because I can remind myself, what is the point of what I'm even doing today? Because I can get all over the place, so being okay, this is what I need students to get out of today. Because we can get so invested in one little part that we forget the big picture. Now, I will say, and because this is so new, that first unit that you guys have doesn't really have a fantastic anchoring phenomenon. Because it was developed before this was a thing. So you guys, unfortunately for chemistry, like I looked for a long time for you guys for good solid units for you guys. There are not very many. I apologize. But I think that this first unit that you have is laid out in a good way. If you can think of a more solid anchoring phenomenon, if that makes sense. Do you guys feel like you have any idea on where you want to go with that?
40. I'm still learning chemistry.
Okay. What about?
I learned the content, but I mean, the way that they arranged it in the chemistry cohort was looking at like the big picture and then moving in smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I don't know, the closest phenomenon that I can think of that because we talked a lot about it, but background radio, and I mean, the best thing that I can think of is like static when you get it on a TV is background radiation from like millions of years. That's the closest thing I can think of.
Okay, so what, remind me again, your guys' first unit, let me, I should have pulled it up. What do you guys see as your performance expectations for the first unit?
Explaining the difference between physical change and chemical reaction.
Okay. I'm opening that. Are you guys in the Cami doc or are you on the planning template or both?
I'm on both.
Okay. All right. Oops. Okay. So how long have you guys been teaching? Chelsea, this is your first year teaching chemistry. What about the other two?
Chemistry, yeah.
This is my 21st year, but they were all middle school and I've never taught science.
Okay. All right.
And I've been teaching for a while, but this new way of teaching is a little different for me.
Right. Yeah. Hey, me too. And I haven't been teaching that long. So they changed it up quite a bit.
Yeah.
All right. So we have, you guys are, let's see. Are you guys looking at this CAMI, the Integrated Science 1B Chemistry Unit? Origin of Energy and Matter. Chelsea, I see you're on there.
Yes, I'm on.
And then, okay, and Sharon, I see. Okay. All right, gotcha. So combustion of hydrocarbons versus nuclear reactions. Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so
it's really hard for me to look on such a molecular.
What if we just start with like a video? So we're talking about why do nuclear reactions release so much more energy than combustion? So if we find either a video or a diagram, or we show them some data about like a nuclear reaction and how much energy is released, and combustion and how much energy is released. Is there anything there that students are any of those ideas that we could give students that they might find puzzling to have them start asking questions?
Definitely.
The closest thing I think about in movies, they have a lot of nuclear reaction videos. Yeah. Like, I can't even remember. It was a recent one where someone hid in a refrigerator and they were on a nuclear, I can't remember the movie, but I mean, that would definitely be a way to like engage them and think about like the science behind it.
Yeah. And so
it's accurate.
Yeah. And like, if it's accurate, yeah. So if we have this question, you guys kind of already have the unit central question, but we don't want to just give them the question. We want them to start thinking about that question and almost asking that question before we give it to them. And so we have to think about how we can do that. And so the example that I gave with the physics group was like when I'm teaching ecology, one thing that I teach them is like, I'm reading this book about the Serengeti rules, and there was this virus that affected buffalo. And once the virus was eradicated, the trees started growing taller, and there were more giraffes, and there were more butterflies. And so, like I give them this, like the beginning and end of the story, but I leave out all the middle, and so that's where all the questions come from. And so if we just frame our anchoring phenomenon like that, then we can start thinking of how we want to tell them that story. So if we give them these videos, and we say, or the data, and we say, here's all, like, this releases this and this releases this, or look at these explosions, and then we frame it in a way where they start asking questions, then thinking about how we're going to tell them that story should come a little easier.
When you teach sequencing events, for something simple like tying your shoes, you show a child a picture of a pair of shoes that are just laying there untied, and then the next scene you show a picture of a child wearing those shoes with them completely tied. How did we get from here to there?
Exactly. How do I do that? How does that happen? And so our goal in the end is for them to be able to explain from beginning to end. But the motivation we use is that we leave out that part in the beginning.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing when Chelsea was talking about the sequence of events. Like you show them pictures of atoms and molecules like a model, and then you show a picture of a nuclear explosion. And how do you tie those two things together? And like you said, a lot of kids have watched movies about,
the Hulk.
Some things
that
like
was one
that.
of them.
The Hulk. Yeah. And so using a movie, like using something like that and making that the phenomenon. And so then when kids start to be like, why are we doing, they don't ask why we're doing this anymore. And that's something that I read in one of the storyline things was, the best thing to come out of this was when students walk into, or when admin walks into my room and asks the kid, why are you doing this? They no longer say, because my teacher told me so. They say, because we're trying to figure out like why this happens. Like we have to do this so we can figure this out. And so just framing it in that way so that they're more invested. And so I think that the reason I gave you guys this unit, one is because it's district developed, but two, because it really kind of has the storyline there. It just doesn't really have the phenomenon. And so once you can figure out the phenomenon and the best way to put that in front of students, I feel like a lot of the work then is done for you. It's just that beginning part, that making it relevant and making it interesting and observable, that you guys need to kind of think about. Right. Does that make sense? Do you feel like that's an achievable task?
Yeah.
It is. It's just trying to get it all laid out, in the proper terminology and the order.
Right.
And, I have to keep remembering that I'm going to be teaching ECE students, and that's going to be, an added challenge, but it's something that I have to constantly be aware of. It's almost like that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to gather all these ideas from the gen ed population.
Yeah.
Trying to formulate that into, not only the series of events, but, because my students have a difficult time asking the proper questions and getting them to understand that there's no such thing as an improper question as long as we're somewhat on task.
Yeah.
And trying to pique that interest.
Well, I would encourage you to come again tomorrow. This is like a shameless plug, but tomorrow we are going to talk about some scaffolds and some tools we can use to support students as they're investigating these phenomenon.
Absolutely. I've already signed up.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Because so don't get too overwhelmed today, because we're really just thinking about like the broad general outline today. And tomorrow, then we're going to start thinking about like, okay, if this is what we need to know in lesson 1, what are we going to do to get the students there, and how are we going to support them? So come back tomorrow, and hopefully that'll be more helpful. Yeah.
Question. So Shannon has she's been giving me the links. Is there any way you can send me the link for tomorrow?
Yes. I will put it at the bottom of the agenda.
Okay.
I'll do that for you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, actually, I'll put it in the chat before I leave because I had a bunch of people that were emailing and they didn't have the link. So yeah, I'll do that for you. I'm going to pull everybody back together for the close because we're yeah.
Can I ask you one quick question?
Of course, absolutely.
That Cami, the app, is that a free extension on Google?
Yes, it is. And I put the link for the Chrome extension in the agenda.
Okay.
Yeah. So people, when they open something, if the students add it to theirs, or if you add it to yours, if you open a document, then you can click open with Cami and it will open it with that.
Okay.
Which is super helpful.
Okay. I went out and did the download the app. So I'll look at the Google page.
Yeah. I like it so far. I've been working with it for a little bit now.
All right.
Good question.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right. I'm going to bring us all back together. I hate that we have so little time, but if you guys have questions, stick around. I promise I'll stick around to help answer them. Yep. All right. It looks like everybody is back. So again, I want to let you guys know, if you feel like you still have some questions and some things that you want to get some input on, feel free to stick around. I want to make sure I honor everyone's time and finish at 11:30, but I'll stick around. So if you have any questions or any concerns, feel free to stay here. So just something to ponder, and this is like a far in the future kind of thing, but once you've developed that storyline and you've developed that anchoring phenomenon, something you want to think about is, how would that storyline be different if a different phenomenon was used? Would the students be able to take that science and transport it onto another phenomenon? And if you don't feel like they can, then maybe reconsider how those science ideas are being taught. So NGSS alignment, if you just want to throw in the chat, what SEPs or science and engineering practices do you think could stem from using this storyline model? Michael, I love that you said that. Another shameless plug for tomorrow. So in fact, all of these are pretty much embedded within the storyline model, the anchoring phenomenon model. And so tomorrow, what we're really going to focus on is SEP2 and SEP4 and how we can use those, and really any SEP, to get our students involved in developing this storyline and making sense of science. And so today what we kind of did was like plan out the overall, or start planning out the overall goal. And tomorrow we're going to look at like, okay, if this is what students need to know or need to learn in the first lesson, what am I going to do and how am I going to set up student learning so that they can discover those science ideas? And we're going to particularly focus on SEP2 and SEP4 and how we can use those to move students along in their learning. So come back tomorrow and hopefully that will help you. So backpack artifacts, any backpack artifacts that we can see coming out of this style of learning? And I know that this is kind of like teacher planning, so maybe we don't see student artifacts or backpack artifacts coming out of this because we're focusing more on our planning. But in the end, this storyline development is going to, it's going to fall into a lot of these. Students will have to be able to effectively communicate with each other and effectively communicate their ideas and their understandings. Yes, CERs. There's going to be a lot of collaboration, and that's going to be in kind of like some future PDs on how we make them productive collaborators using the storyline idea. If we use phenomenon that are based on global issues or local issues or problems, then there's a lot of artifacts that can come out of a storyline that can be placed in this global and culturally competent citizen. So if we choose a phenomenon and then we choose a performance task at the end that has them designing some kind of solution to that original phenomenon, that's going to be a really strong artifact for globally and culturally competent citizen. And then just in general, prepared and resilient learner, the students are being asked to ask questions. The students are being asked to do the investigations and to take the next step. And so even after they learn something, they're going to be asked to apply it. And so that is going to really foster that prepared and resilient learner. If they can make an argument about an explanation, they can do a PowerPoint or poster about their argument. Absolutely. Again, an effective communicator. Awesome. So our focus question at the beginning was, what are the characteristics of a good anchoring phenomenon? And how does the use of anchoring phenomena advance student learning? So I want you to just take 1 minute to reflect on that. If you want to share, you can unmute and share. You can send it in the chat. But it's really important to reflect on these and make sure that we can answer these because that was the goal of this session. So. All right.
Yep. Perhaps this is a low bar, but I really feel like the key to an anchoring phenomena is trying to get students to want to investigate and ask questions about it, which I think directly ties into the second question, right? Which is that's it should be something that kids actually want to find the answer to.
Right. Yeah. That exactly. Yeah. Making sure that it's very specific examples with data, interesting and relevant. Thanks, guys. Great. So any questions at the moment? Okay. Great. All right, so I've put some additional resources in the agenda. I found some websites that have some NGSS aligned phenomena. If you want a couple units to look through, I've put some links in there to ones that have some pretty solid either units or at least lessons. I've put some phenomena-based units in there if I found some that didn't necessarily apply to today's focus, but I feel like could be helpful. So if you want to check those out, those are at the bottom of the agenda as well. All right. The feedback from the last session, what content would you like to see covered in future PDs? More specifics for how to engage and hold students accountable in the digital world, guidance on implementing virtual instruction, more useful tools, how to use the technology. So a lot of NTI focused. I'm trying to incorporate as much as I can into a session and still meet our original goals. But Lacey and I are also going to be planning and offering a separate PD on the virtual tools in a science classroom. And so we haven't set an exact date for that yet, but I wanted to let you know that that will be coming up, and we'll be offering some ideas on tools that can be used and how to structure your virtual NTI world. So some other things that came up, more chemistry. I'm working on it. I am not a chemistry teacher, but I'm learning, so I'm trying to find some resources because I know there's not a lot of chemistry resources out there. Examples, video evidence of actual classrooms. We're going to do some of that tomorrow in our PD tomorrow. Math and science. I wasn't exactly sure what this one meant, so if you were the person that put that, if you could let me know what you meant, I can do my best. Racial topics in STEM is something that I believe is very important. I also believe that it takes a lot of finesse and a lot of understanding ourselves. And so I do want to have a PD about this. I need to do some of my own research so that I make sure that I'm providing you with the best information and that our conversation can be productive. So look out for information more about that if that's what you're interested in, because I do believe that it's something important to discuss. And I want to have those discussions. So again, tomorrow is our last session in this PD series for now. I do plan to develop some more PDs, especially around like constructing arguments and explanations. But at the moment, these were the 3 that I have planned. So if you want more information, you want updates when we plan some more PDs for high school science teachers or science teachers, I've made a form for you to put your name and email address on. And that way I can send those emails out. Right now I post on Twitter and I try to get the word out there. But if you don't have Twitter or you're not interested, sometimes you don't see it. So if you're interested, I want to add more to the series on building an NGSS classroom because there's a lot to learn and a lot to discuss. So I do plan to have some more in the future. And like I said, Lacey and I, and maybe Charlotte too, because she has a lot of input on this, are going to be offering a PD for high school science instruction in the NTI world. All right, so again, there's a quick survey. If you guys could fill it out, it'd be very helpful. I'm trying to use that feedback to help me plan with the future PDs. So the feedback from last time was very helpful, and I was able to change some things before this session using it. So that link is in the agenda. It's also in the PowerPoint slides that I provided you, but that's also in the agenda. So agenda is the best place to go. Again, you can contact Lacey or me or Charlotte. Charlotte, I didn't put your name on here. I'm sorry. But Charlotte is just as helpful as the rest of us. And if you need anything, you can email me, tweet at me, or stick around, and I can answer any questions that you have in a little bit. Thank you guys so much for coming. I really appreciate it. Have a great rest of the day.